the crippled rocket boosters careen out of control. Specially declassified footage shows them being remotely destroyed.
We have a report from the flight dynamics officer that the vehicle has exploded.
We're working with
Flight director confirms that.
Okay.
We are looking at checking with the recovery forces to see what can be done at this point.
I knew instantly that none of them could possibly survive because we didn't have parachutes, we didn't have pressure suits, and at the altitude that they broke up at, there was no way they were going to maintain consciousness. It was immediately obvious to me that we had lost the entire crew.
It didn't look normal. And I knew that from the amount of training that we had had and from the launch that we had seen previous that Kristen and I had witnessed.
We are now looking at all the...
Very, very sad time. I felt horrible. It was a huge loss, and it always will be.
I believe every person in Mission Control came to grips with his demons that day. And I think several of us said a few prayers for the crew. And we also prayed for the team in Mission Control, the team in Launch Control, and those people who would have to live with the aftermath of this accident.
Don't reconfigure your console. Make hard copies of all your displays. Make sure you protect any data source you have.
I was Vice President of the United States way back then. I went down there when Challenger blew up. It was a terrible tragedy, of course. So Reagan asked me to go down to comfort the families. It was a very moving thing for me to see these families in grief. I think the thing that really moved me was President Reagan's comments after that.
We will never forget them, nor the last time we saw them this morning, as they prepared for their journey and waved goodbye and slipped the surly bonds of earth to touch the face of God. Thank you.
California Institute of Technology. Welcome, sir. Was this an accident that did not have to happen?
Yes, it was. It was an accident that had many, many warnings that there was something wrong and that it might sooner or later go off. And the warnings were disregarded.
Disregarded out of incompetence, out of a faulty system, out of bad judgment, for what reason?
I had some difficulty with that. I kind of imagine that something like a child that runs in the road and the parent is very upset and says it's very dangerous. And the child comes back and says, but nothing happened. And he runs out in the road again several times and the parent keeps saying it's dangerous and nothing happens. If the child's view that nothing happened is a clue that there was nothing going to happen, then that's going to be an accident. You could hear brakes squealing a couple of times. That's leakage and the gas is going through the rings and so forth. But again and again I saw in looking through this statements, this new flight is within our database, which just means nothing happened before. It's about the same as we did before, so it can't be unsafe because it was okay last time. And that is a kind of childish attitude that the mother corresponding to the engineers here,
right,
and the management corresponding to the children. That's the way I look at it, and I don't know what you would say. Sooner or later the child gets run over. Is it an accident? No, it's not an accident.
And yet, your commission, and we just heard Chairman Rogers, your chairman, say we're not here to blame anybody. Why not? Why not? Why is somebody not blamed?
I don't know how to assign blame and whether it does any good. The question is, how do we educate the child? The question is, you could say you blame the child for being a little foolish, but it's very difficult. I tried to figure out why they have this attitude and why they weren't paying attention. I've tried various theories, and I really don't know the ultimate cause.
What's your theory?
Well, there's two theories.
Okay,
A lot of people say to me that there's some kind of an idea in management that the incompetence reaches its level or whatever. But I had another idea, but I don't know whether it's right, and that is that in the beginning, all kinds of exaggerations were made about what this thing can do. It can fly 60 flights, it will only cost so much, it'll be recoverable, and there'll be no real problems. The engineers at the bottom must probably scream, this is my imagination, they're screaming up, no, it can't be this way, it can't be this way. We can only go 10 flights, we haven't got enough equipment to train that many crews a year, so forth and so on. And the people at the top who are talking to Congress don't want to hear this. And so they discourage information from moving up. You see, it was just after they were so successful with Apollo. And in that case, they were doing a project with just a little bit harder than they could do, just a little bit harder, so they could do it. And they would solve one problem. No, this is my imagination. I wasn't there.
Yeah.
Somebody would say, how are we going to make a spacesuit? And finally, they got a solution to that. They get excited and tell the others. Fellows are working on some other problem, gets a solution to his problem. And there's a lot of intercommunication because there's excitement and motivation. But when the people
Which is not always necessarily a bad thing, right?
No, not at all. It's what makes it go, and that's why it worked okay with the Apollo. But then when they had this other project, which is, so to speak, impossible from an engineering point of view, it's unrealistic, they don't want to hear what happens. It goes up, and each level in a bureaucracy kind of understands what it's supposed to do. Keep it from the other guys. They don't have to hear it. They don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear it because it would be uncomfortable to be going and saying we're going to do 60 flights a year when just that morning they were told that it's impossible. That's the theory. Now, as you know, I'm a professor of physics and not of management and human relations, and so it's very likely not right, but you asked me for my theory.
Was your theory in the glass been proven correct? Do you think that's really what caused this seal to go bad? It was too cold?
That's one of the possibilities. Certainly was one of the possibilities. It's definite that when the temperature is reduced on the seals, the way they were being used in that device, in the shuttle, temperature has a very bad effect. What caused a certain amount of trouble is that O-ring seals, as used in automobiles and so on, are in a position where the space is constant, that the space that they have to doesn't move, and therefore resilience is not vital, and the temperature is not sensitive to temperature. So everybody thought seals are not sensitive to temperature. But the way this seal was being used, the spacing between the rings and so on would vibrate as the thing blew up with the pressure and would move, and the ring has to follow that. And when it's cold, it can't follow that. So that's definitely a possible contributor. But as we looked into this thing, we found so many other problems associated with the seal design, that there was a kind of putty that could have holes blown into it. There was problems about whether there were all other kinds of difficulties.
I got you.
So
it
that
could be a
we
combination
couldn't decide exactly what it was, and I won't be able to say that it was solely the temperature, but that certainly was a possibility.
How do you feel about the job your commission did, generally?
I think we did a pretty good job. It turned out to be easier in some respects than we could have imagined. It was easy to find out what happened.
But I was curious, why did Chairman Rogers say at the White House today that it would turn out to be more difficult than he thought it was going to be? What was he talking about?
Well, maybe we had different expectations. It's strange because at the very beginning of this commission meetings, I remember Mr. Rogers saying, well, of course, we may never find out what made the accident occur. And that turned out, that's what I meant was easy.
I see. You know what happened. And
we
you
know
feel
what
good
happened.
about
Now, what was difficult, and I think maybe he's referring to this, was the discovery of these weaknesses inside of NASA and their attitudes, this kind of illogic about safety and so forth, which was so extensive from an organization which had such a reputation in the country that it was hard for us to find it out in a sort of emotional way, as to have to come around and say that the Wizard of Oz, which everybody respects, has nothing behind it.
The New York Times...
Almost nothing.
Almost, okay. The New York Times reported this morning that you had a clash with Chairman Rogers over an appendix and also Elizabeth Brackett in her report referred to that passage. What's that all about?
Well, that's terribly exaggerated. It got into the news somehow. I have no control of news.
Sure.
I have no experience with it. At one point, I had written a document which was meant for the other commissioners. I had investigated a number of things, and I was just sending them a note telling them what I'd found. And it wasn't written for publication. Then there was a discussion. The various commissioner members who looked at it said it was pretty good and we ought to just put it in the report. But it wasn't. It was written in a personal style. It wasn't proper for the rest of the report. So since we're going to have appendices, which have a lot of detail, they said, let's put it in appendix. And I'm very happy with that. But because we had this habit of modifying and trying to keep things short by cutting things down that were repetitious, and there were some things in there that were also in the report, we started to modify this, and I looked at it, and I thought it was nice the way I wrote it, you know. So I asked that it be put in the, since it was in the appendix, and we weren't so worried about space, let's leave it in the appendix without any modification at all. And they said, okay. But look at this sentence isn't written very well. And I agreed definitely. It was only a suggestion that I changed the sentence, and I changed it not because I lost any ideas. I had said the same idea in a careful and much more quiet way earlier on in a paragraph, and there was no need to repeat it. It improved the sentence. It's just typographical. I also made another change where I found a sentence had bad grammar. Nobody knows about that one. There's no stink about that one.
So there's no stink here. There's no stink here.